Okay, good morning, for real. Welcome to the Word and Journey podcast, where we have microphones at work and we read stories that shape us and make us think. So if anybody was paying attention to the live stream, so you can ignore the last one, that didn't work. But we have now overcome our technical difficulties, and now I'm back on the stream with Stephanie Bennett, live from Iowa, and what did you say, 20 inches of snow and freezing rain?
Yes.
Oh.
20 inches of snow and freezing rain.
Oh.
It's kind of awful.
Yeah.
But also beautiful.
Well, way to look on the bright side. How very Christian of you. Yeah.
I prefer the snow
to
the really hot, humid summer days. So this is like my time.
That is a beautiful approach to it. I definitely am still a desert boy at heart, and I love the summers. And I like being hot. When it gets really cold like this, I just feel like I'm like holding my breath until the wind stops and the temperature comes up again. But
no,
yes.
I love a good long sleeve jacket, some blankets. It's so nice.
Yeah,
watching the snow fall.
There is something very magical about that, definitely. So, all right. Well, here we are once again. We are reading the Screwtape letters by C.S. written in the 1940s. Yeah. And it's this imaginative sort of fictional account. It's this correspondence between two demons as they endeavor to destroy a human soul. And along the way, there's some perspective for we're getting this insider perspective on how they're working. I would guess the idea is we're supposed to like learn from it and not be so vulnerable to their wily ways. So we definitely will comment on some of the content of the letters. But we did want to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about the book itself and some of the structural points. And this is kind of fun because we both do writing and editing in some fashion. So I'd be curious from your perspective, Stephanie, having now edited some books and dabbled on it, and you've built a good practice and a good career there. More than dabbling, much more than dabbling.
No, yeah. I do this for work.
yes, it's your profession.
It's a year-long project.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
But from your perspective, I mean, what are some of your thoughts, observations just on structure, genre, and some of how Lewis put this together?
So I really like the structure that he used because of the letter format. Like, you don't see that very often where, there's just... you have one person that's writing to someone who we don't ever meet, and you still find out so much about the other person. We learned so much about Wormwood just in these little notes from Screwtape. But I just think it's fascinating the way he puts so much into it, and it's these short little letters, and it reminds me a lot actually of... what is it? The Princess Bride, actually. The book. I don't know if you've ever read that one.
I've never read the book.
Oh, the book is so good because you have a writer who is pretending like he gathered all this history and went through a book and like shortened it all up. So it's the same type of thing where you have, these are all fake letters, but he's making it up and playing it off like these are real. And it's the same thing in The Princess Bride. It's a really good book. I highly recommend.
Yeah.
And like the movie is good. The book is even better. And the whole time you're reading it, you're like, wait, is this like, what parts of this is real and what parts of it isn't?
Oh, that sounds really fun. I enjoy those stories where the lines get blurred or reality gets blurred a little bit. I have to admit, I was only, I think, last year or so that I learned that there was a book for The Princess Bride. So that elevated the whole work quite a bit for me at that point. But yeah, it's a very different thing. So when I read a book by some of Jonathan Safran Foer's older work, everything is illuminated, extremely loud, incredibly close. those two novels.
Mhm.
They're 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 the type of stories where you start off with one character, falling in love with one character.
Mhm.
But there's these interwoven stories, and sometimes the perspective lines get blurred a little bit, and then
Mhm.
he does this thing where you think it's about the one character, and then it turns out, oh, it's actually the other character is the main character, and it's all about them, and it's this fun switch that happens
Yeah.
midway through, and you love it so much. But what I've been appreciating about this is it's kind of that same thing. Like we never actually meet Wormwood or hear his responses, and yet he does end up being this very he's this very real character, pretty fleshed out, and that's reminding me that the I think the human mind, maybe it's the human mind's capacity for making patterns out of things. We infer a lot, and we can fill in
Mhm.
a lot of gaps.
Yeah, it's the
Uh,
whole show versus tell thing that we talk about a lot
yeah,
in editing. You don't have to tell the reader everything. You can use little things that just show hints, and it's
yeah.
enough.
Yeah, one of my best friends, and who's also one of my writing mentors too. He's always telling me about dialogue to remember, especially when it's like dialogue between characters who have known each
Mhm.
other for a long time, or especially a dialogue that they've had in various forms many times already. To you kind of, in a sense, like play the pauses or
Yep.
kind of recognize, so what do they not need to say anymore because they already know it,
Mhm.
and what are just like the very barest like high beats of it, and I kind of get, I think I conceptually get what he's saying, and it's really brilliant, and so I'm aiming to pull it off, but it's built on this idea that um people can make these connections in between things, and so
Mhm.
there's kind of a way for me as a writer, it's like I can get away with writing less, which I
Mhm.
probably should. My works tend to run exceedingly long. So anyway,
Yeah, there's so many, especially in dialogue, there's so many places where you can cut things out. You don't necessarily need the dialogue tag, the he said, she said. It's more of, well, what else is happening at the time? Are they walking? Are they, is somebody frustrated? How can you show that instead of just being like, "Oh, she said angrily?"
yeah,
There's
yeah,
so much you can do.
there's so much you can do. Yeah. So my other thought, and maybe we can come back to this one like even more when for next time when we finish this. But uh so thinking, Christian books about demons,
Mhm.
there's a part of me that's and I don't think this is at all a fair comparison, but I'm comparing this a little bit to like some of the old Frank Peretti novels from the 90s, like
Uh-huh.
way from deep within the bastions of like
Mhm.
conservative homeschool Christianity, focus on the
Yeah.
family, that genre, like like
My I didn't read a lot of Frank Peretti, but I read a lot of Ted Dekker.
oh, okay.
So they
Yeah.
were like they did some work together.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Which I mean, this is very clearly a different genre
Oh, for
of
sure.
story altogether.
Mhm.
But I'm wondering about this literary move of stepping into the demon's perspective.
Mhm.
I'm curious. Well, so as evidenced by the fact that that I initiated, hey, let's read the story. I find some value in the Screwtape letters,
Mhm.
um, but but more broadly speaking, it does kind of bring up this question of like, well, like, I mean, what is the value of a story from the perspective of the other side?
Mhm.
Which I don't know. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of times we, especially in the Christian community, it's Christians talking to Christians. You're always getting it from one angle. And I think one of the most valuable books in the Bible is Job, where you get to see a little bit of the other side. You see Satan going to God and talking, and saying, "Hey, this Job guy, if you do this, he'll curse you," right? And that's one of the most valuable pictures for us because it's making it real, but in a way that's not just creepy or horror. Like that's what you see with Ted Dekker and Frank Peretti is like kind of the horror aspect of it. But with this, it's you're seeing the calculating and all the the purpose and like how something really simple, like, I think at one point it's talking about how like falling in love, it could be used by either the enemy or the demons. It's something just so simple. If it's tweaked a certain way, can be really effective. And I almost think that it's a whole different kind of horror.
Yeah, there's a way something can be horrifying without being scary.
Mhm.
Like you can get a sense for like, oh wow, like they really are this insidious, or they really are like this active in our lives,
Mhm.
and like that conceptually that's like a horrifying thing, even without any of the grotesquerie, and I think that is literally quite clever.
Mhm.
Um, I would say, as I'm thinking about this, I suppose a hazard or a risk factor, and one reason like this sort of thing might not be for everyone is um, so listeners of my show who also listen to the Lord of Spirits podcast will understand what I mean by we don't know what it's like to be a bat. But uh, we might fall into an error when we think that we can conceptualize how the demons and the angels
Mhm.
work, because they're not like us, so they're not going to work in human terms.
Mhm.
You read This Present Darkness, and there's this like whole adventure hierarchy and internal politics or whatever that are very much like the mafia, like the human
Mhm.
mafia, and it's entertaining, but it's very much anthropomorphizing spirits. And in a similar way, I mean, even Lewis does this a little bit. I mean, when he's talking about like the demon school and the demon hierarchy, and like they're,
Mhm.
I mean, he's bringing the demons into the human world and into human language, into human concept. And there's a certain extent at which that doesn't work because
Mhm.
we don't know what it's like to be a demon. We don't know what
Mhm.
it's like to be an angel. We don't know what it's like to be a spirit.
Mhm.
And so I guess one could make the error of saying, well, this is how hell works, is there's this guy named Slubglob and he's a bad teacher and whatever. Um, and the sort of book is really valuable when properly understood, as it's imaginative, it's
Mhm.
speculative, and in a sense, like the demons become kind of a frame to bring out here some other spiritual truths and some good ideas about Christian practice. And so I would say, I would think if one can hold that in mind pretty well, then it's really useful and entertaining and a little shocking sometimes too.
Mhm.
Um, but it's, this isn't evidence based, people. It's
Yeah.
not a history book, not a science book,
Mhm.
not a documentary.
Yes. That's actually something with, like, all the movies and, like, TV shows that have to do with, like, biblical stories and stuff. That's something that I think we so easily, forget. Like, you watch The Chosen or whatever, and you make, like, these connections. "Oh, this happened in the Bible," but it didn't, because we're imagining, we're taking what we know, and we're putting it in real life to try to imagine what it was like, but we don't know, and I think it's really you have to be really careful with stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, have to be really careful. Yeah, I mean, especially the gospel stories. Well,
Mhm.
I mean, any of the biblical stories really, but you could say, I mean, I've heard the language of like these stories have been like condensed, compressed into like their absolute simplest form,
Mhm.
because it needs to translate thousands of years and
Yep.
hundreds of miles of culture, and still have a recognizable truth in it. And
Mhm.
so they necessarily have to be really simple, and lots of details that make something like the Marvel movies really fun are just missing because uh there's a very specific function of these stories, and they
Mhm.
have to remain universal. So anyway, uh yes, genre considerations, one must read these things properly.
Yes.
So anyway, well, now that we've said all that, shall we talk about the book?
Maybe. That might be a
Maybe.
good idea.
A little bit, yes, yes. Okay.
Mhm.
So once again, so we read through 10 letters, and probably we're not gonna get through all of them, but
Mhm.
let's see if we can get through a couple of them. Let's see. So letter 11, my dear Wormwood. Let's see. So letter 11. Maybe I'll pitch this one to you a little bit. So letter 11
Okay.
was on humor. So
Yes.
what's your comments on humor?
Okay. One of my favorite parts was when so he divides humor into 4 categories, joy, fun, the joke proper, and flippancy, and I really liked how he described fun as, like, an emotional sort of froth. I just thought that was such a great description for it. Um, isn't it
Yeah.
just
Okay.
thinking of it as, like,
Oh, that
oh,
reminds me. Okay, here's my nerd reference for the day.
okay.
So there's this one point in Star Trek Deep Space Nine where
Mhm.
Quark, the cantankerous, greedy, miserly bartender, he's giving his nephew this awful human beverage, a root beer, and he's like, "Ah, it's so bubbling and cloying and happy." Oh.
It's an emotional sort of froth.
Very much so.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I loved that. And, like, then he kinda dives in more about, the how joy and fun really aren't worth much for them, but, the joke and flippancy can be really useful because, um, you can make almost anything a joke, and if you can make it a joke, it's funny and, it can even if it hurts somebody, people admire you for making a joke and things like that. So, I don't know. I thought it was really interesting how, he talks about using humor to hurt people while other people look on it as like, "Oh, this is great," "You're just a funny guy. Your jokes don't hurt. It's just a joke." And I think it hit for me a little bit harder because, like, I've been in situations where I've seen jokes like this. Um, we there was a time where, my son would elope, which is very common in autism. They'll run off with no care for danger or other people. And so when we were in really busy places, especially with elderly people, we would use like a wrist strap between the two of us so that if he got away or didn't want to hold my hand, he wasn't going to run into somebody else. And I actually had this man who we like I knew him but not very well, who made a comment to me one day about how my kid would probably like to not be on his dog leash. And like he said it as a joke, he's trying to be funny, he's trying to connect, and like I understand that. But like those things do hurt people, and it's just really interesting how, you know, you can use this to explain away any comment you want, but maybe you shouldn't say it.
Yeah. I really appreciate that example, and it's bringing to mind times when, growing up and, having to figure out, like, sexuality and gender and, like, how do I fit in with the world and everything, and, uh being in say like a youth group setting where, they're all like making gay jokes or they're
Mhm,
all like, making fat jokes
mhm,
or they're things like that. And like you get a sense for like, okay, you're completely ripping on this kind of person, you know, and you're making lots of jokes about this.
mhm.
Like there is no way I'm going to try to have a serious conversation with you about this, like
No.
at all, ever, never, ever,
Mhm,
ever, ever, ever. And
mhm.
so yeah, that's the power of humor
Yep.
is it alienates really well. I don't know. Like I imagine like for the people making the jokes, there's something very connective about that because
Mhm,
humor and language can be connective, but it's a very costly sort of connection because it really severely alienates like a bunch of other people.
mhm. Yeah, I'd say one of the things I've noticed a lot among especially Christian men, I think, is they make a lot I've noticed a lot of jokes, like, about other guys needing to be really tough and stuff like that, and, like, I don't know. I know a lot of guys, who are emotional and, wouldn't be characterized as tough, but they're still really great and stand-up guys, and they don't need to be tough. But those jokes made to those guys or made to their wives, it alienates them, and it's saying, well, you're not somebody I'm going to be able to be friends with. I'm not going to be able to talk to you about what's going on, and
Yeah.
that's sad.
Yeah. 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 There's this other corner of it where, and I definitely do this, where I will use humor to divert people
Mhm.
from actually seeing me, or I'll make a joke instead of talking about feelings,
Mhm.
or yeah. So it becomes very much this defense mechanism, and yeah, I definitely do that. So for me to my my reflex to flippanize to make things flippant, it's very definitely me being like evasive and
Mhm.
probably not necessarily like trying to like keep secrets from people, but just like I'm not wanting to fully connect with you or fully
Yeah.
connect with the moment. So
Mhm.
yeah, yep, cool. Well, that's letter 11. Thank you for some thoughts there.
Yes.
And so y'all be careful with your jokes. Um,
Yes.
so letter 12. So none of these actually have chapter titles, but in my notes I titled this one the subtle road to hell. And um
Yeah.
I really appreciated this one because he's talking. So here, Screwtape describes the safest road to hell as the one that the patient does not notice he is taking,
Mhm.
and he talks about he doesn't need the patient to be terribly wicked, just a little wicked and very distracted.
Yeah.
And he would say, better a sense of dim uneasiness than an explicit repentance of a definite, fully recognized sin. And this I feel like is really valuable. Uh, Yes, it was reminding me a lot of when we do a lot of recovery work, where we're talking a lot about trajectory, and there's a lot of times where once a person starts to get into sobriety, they learn some skills and they know they get a clear sense of like, well, here's how my addiction will destroy my life, and I really actively don't want to do that. I really actively
Mhm.
do want to be a better person, and so it's like saying, well, there's the cliff of relapse. It's 100 steps away. I'm safe. 100 steps away, I'm
Mhm.
pretty safe, and that's great. And it's very unlikely that I'm just all of a sudden going to sprint 100 steps to relapse for no reason. Like
Mhm.
that just doesn't happen. What does happen is I take one step,
Yep.
and then like a few weeks, few months later, I take another step, or maybe like I get kind of stressed and I take like 3 or 4 steps,
Mhm.
or something, or maybe like in a time of extreme stress I take like 20 steps, but I only take like 15 back when I try to repair things. And so it's in that way that relapse is this very cumulative effect,
Mhm.
and if we're not careful, it will feel surprising, but it will only feel surprising because we haven't been paying attention. And here's
Mhm.
where, like in recovery circles, we use the language of rigorous honesty as a really core need, and that can look like people show up in meetings and their goal is to be rigorously honest about like, well, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm feeling, here are using thoughts that I'm entertaining,
Mhm.
that here's resentments that I'm holding on to. In a similar practice in orthodoxy, we have the sacrament of confession, and it's I mean, there's a lot of things that happen there, but
Mhm.
one of the things is we were developing this practice of like we get honest, we get
Mhm.
really blatantly ugly honest with this one person. Maybe you go to like a handful of different priests over the course of your life,
Mhm.
um, and and Screwtape's onto something here. He's saying so people who do that, people who are really brilliantly honest about specific things and like the full impact of specific things, they're a spiritual danger to us, because like when you have a
Mhm.
specific idea of something specific that you're doing wrong, you can make specific changes and
Mhm.
avoid the subtle road to hell.
Yep.
It's when you're not really taking it seriously or not really inquiring within yourself, or like not really being honest with yourself, much less with others, that you start to slip. And
Mhm.
then
Yeah.
Screwtape's whole deal is like, yeah, and like at some point they're just gonna like suddenly wake up in hell, and then we're gonna be so delighted and ha ha ha. um all that
Yep.
to say, yes.
Yeah, no. I think one of the things we tend to do as Christians is we look at what we what we are doing, like, at church. I'm going to church, I'm participating in the Bible study, I'm leading the Sunday school class, I'm volunteering in the kitchen, and we use all of those things to say, "I'm doing fine," when we're ignoring what's going on internally. And I think it's really cool that in orthodoxy, you do have, like, a confession type situation, because in other denominations, we don't, and I think it just, you know we're not as honest sometimes. We're not honest with ourselves because we don't have anyone else that we have to be honest with. It's very easy to, feel that little niggling thought in the back of your head that says, "Oh, I'm not doing that right. I haven't been, praying. I haven't been talking to God, or whatever." And to just kind of ignore it because, well, but I did this and I did this. It's so, so slippery.
It is, yeah.
Mhm.
Or even like kind of seeing how these two, mix and mingle. You might say like, "Oh yeah, like I'm going to church. Like, who cares the kind of humor that I use?"
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, it's it's very subtle, and
Yeah.
I think one of the takeaways I can apply to myself is remembering like everything actually matters. Like
Mhm.
I think that's part of what Screwtape is advising Wormwood is he's like try to make the patient think that like these uh may make him think like all of his choices are trivial and revocable.
Mhm.
He must not be allowed to suspect that he is now, however slowly, heading right away from the sun on a line which will carry him into the cold and dark of utmost space. Um, but the reality is there are no neutral moments and no neutral
Yeah.
actions. And so if I can pay attention to that, everything is a step on a trajectory one way or the other.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. No, he made a comment about how it's not about getting people to do bad things, it's about getting them to do nothing and to just
yeah,
stand still. And I think we so often think that if we just don't interact, if we don't, I'm not making a stand, I'm not putting my opinion out there, I'm just staying put. We think it's fine, I'm doing nothing, I'm okay. But it's the doing nothing that, you know, that's actually the problem sometimes.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it gets to be really, really subtle. So
Mhm.
dun dun dun. Okay. Letter 13.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts here about
Okay.
letter 13?
So letter 13, the patient repented and refocused on God. So Screwtape is giving Wormwood a list of all the things he did wrong, which is kind of it's just like that typical like, okay, this and this and this and that you're just messed up bad. um And he talks about how he made the mistake of letting the patients read a book he really truly enjoyed and go on a walk, um, instead of, like, the targeted, like, pleasures that Wormwood was giving before. And, we're re-emphasizing the whole do nothing thing, that was in the first one where uh, he says, "Let him do anything but act." Like, let him acknowledge this, but don't let him act on it because this is gonna be a problem. And, like, I think the thing I've really got out of this is that self-care is really important.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
doing those little things, reading that book you really wanna read, even if it's not what you're supposed to be doing right now, or, you know, taking that walk. You know it's really important. It gives you a chance to think, it gives you a chance to evaluate. So much of our lives we spend, just bouncing from one thing to the next and not really taking the time to think about how we're doing and what we're feeling and like what life is looking like and if we're actually doing well. And if you take the quiet time to focus on, you know, yourself a little bit, it's also easier, I think, to focus on God.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a plug for good self-care, caring for yourself.
Mhm,
Also that, valuing the organism, like it's important. Our bodies
mhm,
matter. Our bodies are important. And so something like, in this case, he's going for a walk, but we could say that's representative of, movement in general, nutrition in general, caring for the physical self as if it is actually sacred, which we
Mhm.
believe it actually is. And I was really struck by this one too. I'm just thinking there's an aspect of the Christian life that is joy. I mean, that's,
Mhm.
suffering is also really, really vital also, but also joy and finding joy in the moment. And part of the thing is, and there's a couple other places where Screwtape talks a lot about, get your patient out of the present moment,
Mhm.
especially, get him into the future, into the
Yeah.
undetermined future. But in this one, Wormwood's error is to allow the patient to be really present in one
Yeah.
moment and in
Mhm.
something really real. And there's something about, like, when you are really truly present, there is something really enjoyable about that.
Mm.
Just like I'm enjoying a story for the sake of enjoying it.
Mhm.
I'm being out in nature, and I'm connected to myself. I'm connected to the world, and it's that connection. So much of, Screwtape's other advice is like, how do I get this? How do you, Wormwood, disconnect this patient from his body, from his community, from
Mhm.
his values, from like everything but his racing thoughts, and that's where you've got control of him. But here, like, like the patient, like, is like actually like in
Mhm.
himself, in nature, in his enjoyment, and there's something really safe about that. So not to say that the Christian life is all about pleasure and walks and, self-care, because there are times when suffering is really important also.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, um,
There's a
yeah,
lot of growth in suffering, but there
yeah,
should be some joy too.
right,
Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah, this is a great line from Screwtape. He's telling Wormwood. Yeah, so talking about God, he's like, remember always that he really likes the little vermin and sets an absurd value on the distinctness of every one of them. So, uh, yeah,
Mhm.
yes. God loves us, and He'd love us to enjoy His creation. Who knew?
Mhm.
So, okay. Um, let's see.
So
So,
14.
yes, letter 14. Um, I have brief notes
Whew.
about this one.
This one was good.
Yes. So, something about humility. Humility, we would say, is the key to the Christian life. It's been called the only virtue that the devil cannot duplicate. And so here, what does he say? Okay. He says, the most alarming thing, he said, Dear Wormwood, the most alarming thing in your last account of the patient is that he's making none of those confident resolutions which marked his original conversion. No more lavish promises of perpetual virtue, I gather, not even the expectation of an endowment of grace for life, but only a hope for the daily and hourly pittance to meet the daily and hourly temptation. This is very bad.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so there's um, and it actually kind of reminded me of summer camp a little bit.
Oh,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, my experience of going to summer camp as a, teenager in high school, being in youth group and wanting to be this kids
Mhm.
counselor, was you go to summer camp and it's exhausting and it's fun and there's all
Mhm.
of these special moments with people and like late night, worship songs around the campfire, and everybody is just like, praise Jesus, and we love it, and we love it, and baptism sometimes, and in between really violent games, um,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
depending. Um,
Mhm.
so many eggs.
Oh, yes.
Yes. But characteristic and legendary to this sort of experience is like the camp high and the
Mhm.
resolutions and the, like, I've decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. And that lasts, depending on the kid, it could last like a few days, few weeks, few months sometimes.
Mhm.
Maybe this was my experience, was very much kind of like stringing my spirituality along from like summer camp to summer camp to winter camp
Mhm.
to summer camp. And like, if I could just like be in that camp high like often enough, I could be fine,
Mhm.
and I've come to realize like that wasn't really spirituality. That was basically addiction. I was like, I'm after these highs and I'm not using drugs. So,
Mhm.
So what I think Screwtape and Wormwood are talking about is um, if the patient were in this mentality of I'm going to just make these grand promises, these grand resolutions, these really firm resolves, kind of calls to mind like New Year's resolutions a little bit,
Mhm.
or this idea that you see this in some recovery circles also. Someone gets clean and they have this super moment of clarity where they're like, drugs are bad, I'm destroying my life, I want to be a better person, I'm going to quit everything forever, and I'm going to go to meetings every day, and I'm going to do all of these things, and I'm going to read the books, and I'm going to work out, and blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
We call it acting in, and we say it's not recovery, it's not sobriety, it's just the inverse of what you were before,
Mhm.
because it's not sustainable.
No.
And so it sounds like what the patient does is he slows down and he chills
Mhm.
out, and he stops making these big promises, and he's just it seems like the patient has found his way to kind of being like, Lord, give us this day our daily bread, like that sort of mentality.
Mhm.
Like, just give me enough grace to face today, to do one day at a time, one moment at
Mhm.
a time. And when Screwtape sees this, he freaks out and he's like, Wormwood, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're failing. So anyway.
Mhm. Yeah. No, the New Year's resolutions is what I thought of too. With how we make these grand promises, like I'm going to do this for a whole year, and we stop, we fail because it's usually too much. I actually hate making resolutions for that reason. The last time I did was to write in a journal, and I think I set pretty good rules because it wasn't. It was just to write at all. And I succeeded because there was no like it wasn't that intense. And I think that's what they're saying here, the patients decided not to be as intense about it and he's realized the difference from when he first became a Christian and he tried to do all these grand things and he failed, right? And so he's like, well, I guess that didn't work. Let's make this achievable.
Mhm.
That's my favorite kind of goal, is a short achievable goal.
Yeah, 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 and it's a lot of the church fathers will talk about this too, especially when people are learning to pray. They're very much like, 5 minutes, no more, or like
Mhm.
say the Jesus prayer 12 times, no more, and it's like a one-line prayer.
Mhm.
Because the idea is like it needs to be sustainable,
Yeah.
and as soon as we start doing these big things and big accomplishments, that is room for pride, and you say like,
Mhm.
hey, like, look at all of these things that I'm doing, I'm super cool, I'm super spiritual. And so then Screwtape's advice here, he's like, I see only one thing to do at the moment. Your patient has become humble. Have you drawn his attention to the fact? uh
Yeah. Yeah.
so and so we get a sense of like this idea of like false humility, or starting to make humility a thing. uh and I saw this quote, and I forget who said it. It was one of the saints. He was talking about like humility is a really tricky virtue, because as soon as you've gotten it, you lose it. Because like
Mhm.
like as soon as you recognize it,
Yeah.
you've lost it in a way. And so there's kind of this way that like the safe course is a version of like kind of like self forgetfulness. Like, you do a good thing and forget it. Like, you do a bad thing, quickly repent, and then kind of
Mhm.
forget it, and you move on. And you don't try to do super grand things all of the time. You just try to like kind of gently do
Mhm.
little things consistently.
Yeah.
And that's really ordinary. It's really boring. It's not at all Instagrammable. But like that's a good solid approach to the Christian life.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, the thing with humility, there's such a balance between being actually humble and thinking poorly of yourself. And it's
right.
a very hard line to see sometimes because you could be so focused on I want to be humble that you're putting yourself down all the time. And I think
Y-
that was kind of one of the things he was saying, either make him think really highly of himself for being humble or make him think really low of himself.
Yeah. But because in either case, he's thinking about himself
Mhm.
and not on the presence of God, or not on the heavenly kingdom, or
Yep.
or not on the needs of others or anything. So
Mhm.
yes. So yeah. So there's this balance of like on the one hand, we ought to be like kind of like self-forgetful and like not thinking about ourselves. But on the other hand,
Mhm.
something like taking care of ourselves, like going for the walk, reading the good book, being present in ourselves can also be a good thing too. And so that in that way there is this very delicate balance of virtue and practice here
Mhm.
that we have to consider. And
Yeah,
lots of strings to pull, easy for the demons to get at us. So
for reals.
yes. So, um, you have time for maybe another one or two?
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah, I
So,
think
letter 15.
15.
Yes.
This one is the one that's focused on time, and you referenced the future before. So it's talking about how the enemy wants us to be focused on the present and eternity. Um, whereas Screwtape wants you to be focused on the future. And the reason is if you are focused in the here and now, just like in the last letter, you're living daily, you're probably it's more achievable, right? And if you're focused on the eternity, you're focused on what I do in this day to day will get me to where I want to be in eternity. But if you are focused on the future, you bring in all those little insecurities and all those anxieties of like what's going to happen. You know, I think there was a lot of this with COVID. Like when people at first, especially at first, where you're like, well, I don't know what's going to happen, and everything was changing, all the information here and there, and so there's just a lot of anxiety about that. Um, so this was such a good one. I think one of the things it brought up for me was like politics in like church and how we respond to politics. Because if you look after an election, whether that be school board, president, whatever, there's this devastation in the church, and it doesn't matter what side you're on. If you're a Democrat, or a Republican, you end up devastated, and we shouldn't be that upset, right? It shouldn't be something that we're so focused on how this person's going to do in the future because we're hoping for eternity, and God can use whatever, right?
Hmm. Yeah. There's in the Divine Liturgy every Sunday. There's this one part like early on in the liturgy, and I believe it's quoting a psalm, and I don't know which one. Orthodox fail. But it's put not your trust in princes and sons of men. You know, you know
Mhm,
their plans perish.
mhm.
And yeah, so what you said,
Yeah.
politics doesn't save us. Yeah,
Mhm,
yeah. For I love this from a spiritual standpoint, but also from a counseling standpoint too. Like, um, there, when we talk about being mindful and being present, taking one day at a time, like that's the manageable chunk, or that's the reality. Like what's going on
mhm,
right now is what I can actually work with, what I can actually affect. And
mhm,
um and I like how he mentions how we can get stuck in the past, and I think that might
mhm,
be part of what the depression experience is. I'm
mhm,
full of regret, I'm full of resentment, I'm full of unresolved grief and
mhm,
things, which is really real, and it's very easy to get stuck there. And there's a lot of work to do to come out of the past into the present, and a lot
mhm,
of past things that need to be healed. But I get it. I was really resonating with this idea of, and as powerful as that is, it's so much more powerful when they get caught up in like the uncertainty of the future and the
yeah.
anxiety and the doom and gloom. And given the chaos of the world, I mean, it's a very fertile ground
Mhm,
for exploitation and everything. And so, yeah, essentially re-saying the thing that he said because it's so good
yeah,
and so worthwhile. But like
it is.
looking to the future causes stress. Um, Often maybe because we're not looking far enough. Looking
Mhm,
out of time into eternity is much more grounding, much more comforting. So
mhm,
yeah, and procedural note there. So when we talk about where where we're thinking about in a lot of counseling terms, we'll talk about our focus, or talking about our awareness, or like to use terms like the focal point of our awareness, or the point of focus, or in orthodoxy we'll talk about the door of your mind. But it's the thing you're thinking about right now, and it's the place where your focus and your attention is right now. And that could be a particular thought, it could be a body sensation, it could be something like the painting behind me or something. But a really good discipline is learning how to train your focus to go where you want it to. And that is essentially what mindfulness disciplines are. And a lot of what happens in a counseling session is learning to work with your awareness and to master that. And so, I mean, and then nothing super complicated about that. It's just like it's a muscle that we can learn to use and become better at. But once we learn how to use it, the applications are endless, and they're really wonderful there. So cool. All right. So last letter for today. Hey, we're 6 for 6 so far.
Hey, that's good.
Yeah. So letter 16 is about church shopping.
I loved this.
Right. It was really good. So basically, Screwtape finds out that Wormwood has let his patient like stay at the same church the whole time, and again he flips out and he's like, what are you doing? May I ask what you are about? And everything. So the idea is Screwtape has a sense for, if his patient can remain rooted in one place, he's much more spiritually secure. And if he's able to, C.S. Lewis got very smart here, so I had to like think a little bit about what he's talking about. But I think he's talking about if C.S. Lewis is very smart.
Yes.
So there's a way of like rejecting something that is truly harmful that is good. But there's also a way of thinking a lot about the thing that you're rejecting that gets really, really bad. So you kind of get the sense for, well, if like this church is teaching false doctrine, we should reject that. Or if they're just like outright toxic, we should reject that and move on, and just move on and just kind of cleanly, gently be done with it. And that will be okay. But I think what Screwtape is wanting is for his patient to just like be like obsessing over the complaints. Like earlier in the letter, she was talking about like, oh, like the greasy grocer and the fat lady and blah blah blah, and like the person who chews too loud. Like have them like focus on those details and just like be critical of them and things like that. And so there's that attitude there, and because he doesn't want the patient to be content in one place or rooted in one place or able to like experience the benefits of rooting in the community long term, like people who know you, people who love you, people you can rely on, people you can trust,
people who will check in with you and say, hey, where are you at?
Yeah, absolutely. And so he recommends a couple other churches, one that has a very watered down like relevant approach to everything, to where and they can imagine this being like one of those churches where like they kind of have like the vague form of a church, and like they maybe like kind of reference the Bible, but like it's this really vague version of the gospel, if the gospel is even there. And then this other church that I would imagine probably has like a little bit more like clear theology, or maybe even like more active like interaction with the biblical text, but it's very much like a faction, and it's very much like an angry church, or very much like a pastor that's just like really radical, really opinionated, really driven by hate, and everything. And so the other kind of extreme, and Screwtape likes both of those because they're going to be extremes in a way. So takeaways, I guess, takeaway for people in church, to kind of remember. So the gospel itself is really interesting, really compelling, really challenging and offensive, like all by itself. It doesn't need your personality layered over it to make it anything. Like it will do its work on its own. And it's where we try to make a church about our human personalities that
Mm.
we become really vulnerable to hitting these extremes
Mhm.
and everything. Um, and so, and I guess the takeaway for me to think about, it's this age old question for me, like when a church community is challenging, like when like parish life at my parish is challenging, which often it is. Here we have a good amount of drama. Uh,
Mhm.
my impulse is always like, well, I'm going to go to Holy Apostles across the river because they're better than we are. So, or they don't have
Right.
these problems, and I'm just going to run away. Uh,
Mhm.
and uh, and again, sometimes we need to do that. So I think, but I'm kind of getting the sense for those times are probably much more rare than we think, and probably there's much more spiritual benefit more of the time to sticking it out, working through the drama, working through the chaos, and reconciling with people, and learning to not be so critical. And if we're being honest, trying to recognize, well, how do I contribute to the drama? Because
Mhm.
I surely contribute to the drama. um you know I contribute more drama than anybody. Look at how look at how not
Yeah.
humble I am. uh
Yeah.
so
No.
yeah.
As a pastor's wife, I've seen a lot of people leave church over the years, Um, and I think the thing to really consider when you're trying to decide, do I need to go to a new church? Is this a preference, or is this a really good reason to leave? I There is one church that we worked at for a while, and we lost several people to another church just down the road. And the reason was the music. They just liked the music there better, which is completely a legitimate opinion. You can totally have a preference. But like what was the lead up to that? Did you take any action in your own church? Did you say, well, I don't like our songs. Maybe I need to join the worship team and I can see I can try to bring in some new things as a person who's volunteering, or maybe have a talk with the worship director and say, hey, why do we choose the songs we do? Why is this our style? Maybe it's that the worship director doesn't know how to play the guitar, and so he only has the piano. You just don't know. So I think there's something to be said for trying to talk to somebody, trying to see if you can join in and bring some of what you're looking for, and then just understanding sometimes it's a preference and it may not be some a good reason to leave. And now there are definitely times where you get to the point where you're like, I've joined the team, I've talked to everybody, and it's just not working. And that's okay, and move on. But like at least you did something. And like the same thing with, like, if you're having trouble with somebody in church, if you're having a disagreement, is that there's definitely times where you shouldn't engage anymore. But have you tried? We're supposed to, as Christians, try to resolve conflict and talk to each other and do those things. So we should ideally go to that person and say, hey, I'm having trouble with this. Can we talk about it? Because, you know, just leaving your church, you're not just leaving that one issue. You're leaving all these people that supposedly you've built up relationships with, and who've been supporting you in your faith, and they've been supporting, you're supporting them. And so you're breaking a lot more, you're losing a lot more bridges and a lot more connections when you
Yeah.
make that choice. And it shouldn't be a flippant one, or it needs to have some weight to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Should be carefully thought out. And yeah, done with great deliberation.
Mhm.
So I imagine, I mean, this is like a tangent we can't go down, but like just, relationships also. Like
Mhm.
my relationship is difficult. Should I leave or whatever? And I imagine like a lot of
Mhm.
the same principles are at play there as well. But that's a box we don't have time to touch today. So, but
Mhm.
but I appreciate that. I mean, I appreciate your perspective, having been in the active ministry team,
Mhm.
and having to care for people who are having to make these decisions. They're not light decisions by any means.
No, but they're still important decisions. I know one of the things One of the things that Jared always wants when somebody goes to a new church is for them to let him know, like, don't just leave your church, but say, "Hey, I'm making the choice to go to a different church. Here's why." Just that means when you leave, at least the people you're leaving behind know you're being cared for. You're going somewhere else. You're gonna be taken care of. I don't know. That's one of the things he likes.
Yeah.
That communication.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. Even in my men's groups, when it's a rare and wonderful thing when someone will like actually voice a complaint in group and we can address it, or when people like will say goodbye before they leave. Um, it's a very easy thing to just like slink away. We don't have to take
Mhm,
any responsibility for ourselves or our feelings or learn or grow at all. We just disappear, and
mhm,
then we don't grow.
mhm.
So. Well, there's our merry romp through the mind of hell this morning on a
Yes.
Monday in January. So we will wrap it there for time's sake, but we
Mhm.
will come back at least one more time. There's 13 more letters, and we're gonna come back at least one more time to talk through those and what the content is, and see, just what does happen to this patient after all.
Yes.
So in the meanwhile, if you want to connect with Stephanie,
Mhm.
is it bennettsedits.com?
Bennett'sEdits.com. Yes.
Bennettsedits.com. Cool. Yes, for all your editing needs.
Yep.
And it's a really wonderful experience to work with an editor, and Stephanie is a great one. So y'all should check her out there. And you can support the podcast here if this kind of thing is valuable to you. You can go to patreon.com/outer circle and send us a few dollars a month, and that would be really valuable. Otherwise, you can follow me on Instagram at Moses Bernabe, and follow us on YouTube, and do the whole thing where you like, rate, and review the podcast, as all good podcast listeners should do. And you should feel very guilty if you don't do it. Just kidding. No guilt at all. Guilt is not healthy. Anyway. Okay, we should be done. We'll see you all next time in about 2 weeks, and hope you all have a wonderful, warm couple weeks in the meantime. So, goodbye.
Bye.
Word and Journey is a podcast by Moses Bernabe. If you like what you hear, consider supporting the show with dollars, reviews, or shares, or all of the above. Word and Journey can be found on most major podcast platforms and on my author Patreon at patreon.com/Moses Bernabe. Moses Bernabe can be found at mosesbernabe.com. Contact info for my most excellent co-hosts can be found in the liner notes. The podcast logo was designed by TJ Todd, with additional development by Moses Bernabe. The theme music is by Aaron Esparza. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.